Good evening, traveler through the silent corridors of time. I am glad you have found your way here, to this place of absolute stillness. Before we begin our long descent into the vast golden currents of the past, I invite you to find the center of your own rest. Close your eyes. Feel the weight of your body sinking deep into the earth, as if you are becoming part of the heavy, ancient, lush soil that has slept for 10,000 years. Breathe in slowly, drawing in the cool, thin air of the high plateaus. Breathe out, letting the frantic pulse of the modern world, the iron, the glass, the neon lights, dissolve like salt in a deep, dark river. We are leaving the noise of the present behind. Pause. We are drifting back, through the centuries, through the lingering smoke of 1,000 forgotten dynasties, back to a moment when the world was silent, and the first drop of water began its long, weary journey toward the sea. The river is calling to you. Its rhythm is your rhythm. Relax. Let your mind flow with the silt and the shadow, and let the history of the Middle Kingdom breathe through you. Imagine the North. A land where the earth and the sky have forgotten their boundaries. You are standing upon the lush plateau. Beneath your feet lies the dust of 1,000,000 years, wind-blown, patient, and heavy. It is a world carved from yellow silence. There are no cities here. No iron. No smoke. Only the endless ridges of earth, stretching toward a horizon that never ends. Listen. Can you hear it? Deep in the belly of the valley, the Huangho stirs. The great yellow river. It does not flow like the rivers you know. It moves like a liquid continent. It is thick with the silt of the mountains, a serpentine deity, heavy and slow, grinding the stone into sand, grinding the sand into time. To the ancients, this river was the pulse of the world. It was a provider, and it was a destroyer. It gave life to the millet in the fields, and it took that life back in a single night of rising water. This is the great sorrow. A cycle of breath and drowning that has dictated the soul of this land since the first dawn. Now, let us go back further. Back before the kings, into the era of the mist. You see the 3 August ones. They are shadows moving against the firelight. Fuxi, the celestial teacher. He is looking at the back of a tortoise, tracing the lines, seeing the geometry of the stars in the shell of a creature. Pause. He is naming the world. He is teaching the people that the universe has a pattern, and that if you follow the pattern, you can find your way home. Then comes Shinom, the divine farmer. Imagine him in the tall, wild grass. He is tasting the bitterness of 100 herbs. His body is a vessel for the knowledge of life and death. He is bleeding so that the tribes may survive. He is turning the wild earth into a garden. But the mist remains. The world is still a place of shadows, until the arrival of the Yellow One. Huang Ti, pause, the Emperor of the Earth. Picture the plain of Chulu. The fog is so thick you cannot see your own hand. The rebel CHU has summoned a supernatural storm, a void of white where direction has died. The Emperor's army is lost. They are wandering in circles, waiting for the end. But you see Huang Ti standing atop his chariot. He does not look at the fog. He looks at a tool of his own making. The south-pointing chariot. A figure of bronze, with an arm that never wavers. No matter how the wheels turn, no matter how the wind howls, the finger points to the south. This is the birth of the Middle Kingdom. The victory of the compass over the cloud. Huang Ti did not just win a battle. He established the center. He fixed the world in place. He taught us that order is the only shield against the chaos. But the water was still the master. Imagine you the great. He is not a king in a palace. He is a man with a shovel, standing in the marshes for 13 years. His feet are calloused. His skin is burned by the sun. He is a king who has forgotten the taste of sleep. 3 times he passes his own house. He hears his son crying inside. He smells the smoke of his hearth. But he does not enter. He cannot. Because the river is still wild. He does not fight the water. He listens to it. He opens the mountains to give the river a path. He leads the drowning land back into the sun. When he is finished, the earth is no longer a swamp. It is a map. It is a grid of fields. It is a nation. The Qing Dynasty begins here, in the mud, and in the sacrifice of a man who gave his own rest, so that a civilization could dream. The river carries us further now, into the shadows of the Shang. You see the city of Yin, a place of dark solemnity. The kings here are not just rulers. They are high priests of the Bronze Age. They live in a world of bone and blood. Imagine the scent of incense, mixing with the metallic tang of bronze. They are burning tortoise shells in the fire. They are listening to the sound of the bone cracking. They believe the ancestors are speaking in those cracks. Pause, they are obsessed with the beyond. Their bronze vessels are heavy, covered in the glares of monsters. The Teodie, watching, demanding wine, demanding sacrifice. It is a civilization that fears the dark, and yet it is the dark that defines them. But even the Shang, with their bronze and their bones, could not hold the mandate forever. The last king Chohin, he has forgotten the river. He has forgotten the people. He sits in his palace of meat and wine, while the dikes crumble and the yellow silt rises once more. The river is waiting. The earth is shifting. A new sound is coming from the west. The sound of bells. The bells of the Zhou are ringing. Can you hear them? They do not ring for war. They ring for harmony. In the 11th century before the Christian era, a new thought began to grow in the rugged valleys of the West. The House of Zhou was a people of the mountains, tempered by the cold winds and the hard soil. They looked at the decaying splendor of the Shang Palace, and they saw a world that had lost its moral weight. To the Zhou, power was not a trophy to be held. It was a loan from the stars. This is the birth of Tianming, the mandate of heaven. Imagine King Wen, the cultured. He is sitting in a prison cell, year after year. He does not plot revenge. He contemplates the hexagrams. He is watching the patterns of the universe. He understands that the sky is not an indifferent void. It is a mirror. If a ruler is virtuous, the rains will fall. If a ruler is cruel, the earth will tremble. Heaven gives, and heaven takes away. You see the plain of Mai. The chariots of King Wu are crossing the river. The Shang army is vast, a forest of bronze and iron. But as the Zhou advance, something impossible happens. The Shang soldiers do not fight. They turn their spears around. They are welcoming their conquerors, because they have realized the mandate has already moved. It has left the palace of Yin, and it is now riding with the men of the West. But victory is not enough. A nation needs a soul. Imagine the Duke of Zhou, the sage. He is the architect of the dream. When the war is over, He does not build high walls. He builds a system of ritual. To the Duke, the world is a dance. There is a correct way to pour the wine, a correct way to greet a father, a correct way for a king to stand before the sun. This is not mere etiquette. It is the cosmic glue. He believes that if every man performs his role with precision, if every movement is a note in a perfect song, then the universe will remain in balance. The people will be fed. The rivers will stay in their banks. The state will become a symphony. You see the well-field system. The earth itself is divided into perfect squares. 8 families working the outer fields, and 1 field in the center for the king. But the king is not a master. He is a father. The state is the family writ large. For centuries, this dream held the world together. This was the era of the She King. The Book of Odes. You hear the voices of the people singing in the mist. Songs of mulberry leaves and soldiers on the frontier, and the heavy dew on the grass. It was a world of music and ritual. A long golden afternoon of the spirit. But the river of time is never still. As the centuries pass, the kinship grows cold. The feudal lords in their distant cities, they are beginning to forget the music of the center. They are starting to covet the central fields. They are building their own walls. The mandate is beginning to fray. Imagine King Yu, the last king of the West. He is a man who has lost the music in his heart. To make his concubines smile, he lights the beacon fires, the fires of war. The lords rush to the capital, only to find the king laughing at them. It was a joke. But when the barbarians truly arrived, and the fires were lit once more, the lords did not come. They thought it was another game. The capital was sacked. The king was slain. The house of Zhou fled eastward into the twilight. The mandate remains, but the mirror is cracked. The king is now a ghost in a ritual robe. He sits on his throne in Luoyang, but no one listens to his voice anymore. The spring and autumn period has begun. The era of shattered jade. The chariots are no longer moving in the patterns of ritual. They are moving for blood. But in this fragmentation, something new is being born. When the old world dies, the mind is forced to seek new truths. The river is becoming turbulent. The dark heart of the night is coming. And somewhere in the shadows, the sages are beginning to speak. The river of time has entered a dark and narrow gorge. The ancient music of the Zhou has faded into the heavy, rhythmic thud of marching boots. You are standing in the heart of the warring states. The air is cold, and it smells of wet earth and distant smoke. The Middle Kingdom is no longer a garden of ritual. It is a forest of iron. 7 kings, 7 swords, all reaching for a single broken crown. In this era of shattered jade, when the old gods have turned their faces away, the Chinese mind began its most profound journey. Not outward into conquest, but inward into the soul. It was a night of great sorrow, but in that night the stars began to burn. Imagine a lonely traveler on a road choked with dust. His carriage is old, his robes are stained with the mud of 100 provinces. This is Confucius. Confucius. He is not a prophet. He is a man of scholarly grief. You see him standing on the bank of a river much like this one. He watches the water flow into the dark. It passes on like this, he whispers, never ceasing day or night. Confucius looked at the chaos, the sons killing fathers, the kings betraying their people, and he saw a world that had lost its music. To him, the salvation of man was not in new laws, but in the restoration of the heart. He dreamed of the Junzi, the superior man. A man who rules not by the sword, but by the quiet, irresistible power of virtue. He wandered from palace to palace, offering the silk of his wisdom to men who only wanted iron. He was mocked. He was hungry. He was a lonely star trying to outshine the sun of war. He died believing he had failed, never knowing that his whispers would one day become the stone foundation of an empire. But while Confucius sought to rebuild the city, another voice spoke from the silence of the mountains. Imagine Laozi, the old master. If Confucius was the architect of the walls, Laozi was the poet of the wind. He looked at the same wars, the same blood, and he saw not a lack of ritual, but an excess of desire. The more laws you write, he whispered, the more thieves you create. To Laozi, the world was not a machine to be fixed. It was a river to be followed. The Tao. The Way. He taught the art of Wu Wei. Non-action. He told you to be like water. Water is soft. Water yields. And yet, water wears away the hardest stone. While the kings built higher towers, Laozi pointed to the empty space inside a cup. While the generals sharpened their spears, Laozi spoke of the silence between the notes of a song. He left us 5,000 words of mystery, and then he rode his buffalo into the mist, leaving the world to find its own balance. The night grew deeper. The 100 schools rose like a chorus of desperate voices. You see Mozi building great machines to defend the weak, preaching universal love in a time of universal hate. You see Mencius speaking of the innate goodness of the heart, like a sprout of spring pushing through the winter snow. And you see Xuanzi warning that man is born warped, and only the harsh pressure of ritual can force him straight. They were the stars of a dying age. Burning bright, burning fierce, before the arrival of the iron will. They taught us how to think, how to hope, and how to remain human in a world that had become stone. The river carries us further now. The philosophical mist is beginning to freeze. The era of the thinkers is ending. The era of the executioner is about to begin. The stars have been extinguished. The night has found its master. From the rugged valleys of the west, a cold wind is blowing. It carries the scent of iron and the silence of the law. The state of Qing has arrived. You see Yingzheng, the first emperor. He does not believe in the music of the sages. He does not believe in the soft mercy of the ancients. He believes in the machine. To him, the Middle Kingdom is not a family. It is a single massive engine of war. Imagine a world where the individual does not exist. Only the soldier and the farmer. This is legalism. A world of rewards and punishments. As precise as a gear. As merciless as a blade. One by one, the ancient kingdoms fall. The bells of the Zhou are melted down. The refined scholars are silenced. In the year 221 before the Christian era, the world becomes one. Yingzheng takes the title of Qin Shi Huangdi, the first sovereign emperor. He has redefined the earth. The emperor looked at his empire, and he saw only the need for unity. If the world was to be one, then all things must be the same. He standardized the soul. He measured the axle of every chariot, so they would all travel the same ruts in the road. He measured every grain of rice. He even measured the thoughts of men. Imagine the burning of the books. 2,000 years of wisdom cast into the flames. The smoke rose into the black sky of Xianying, carrying the songs of the poets and the arguments of the sages. History, the emperor declared, begins with me. Those who dared to whisper the old truths were marched into the cold earth and buried alive. Then there was the wall. A line of stone to match the line of the law. Hundreds of thousands of men, convicts, farmers, scholars, all marched to the northern frontier. They labored in the blistering heat. They died in the lethal cold. Their bones became the mortar of the stone. The wall was not just a fortification. It was a psychological boundary. A line between the civilized field and the nomadic void. It was a monument to fear. The emperor was obsessed with the eternal. While he built his empire on the earth, he prepared a shadow empire beneath it. He feared death more than he loved power. His tomb was a miniature universe. Rivers of liquid mercury, flowing forever. A ceiling of pearls, representing the stars. Thousands of clay warriors, standing guard, an army of mud to protect a man who had stolen the breath of a nation. But the iron will had a flaw. It was too brittle. A machine can be powerful, but it cannot breathe. When the first emperor died in his carriage, searching for the elixir of immortality, his empire began to crack before his body was even cold. The laws were too harsh. The taxes were too heavy. The people had been forced into silence, but in that silence, a storm was brewing. The Qing Dynasty lasted only 15 years. A violent flash of lightning in the dark. But however brief, the mold was cast forever. The idea of China, one script, one law, one destiny, was born in blood and iron. The iron was forged. Now, it only needed to be tempered. The river carries us further, away from the cold stones of the Qing. The iron is melting, and in its place, a more enduring gold is beginning to shine. The age of the Han is rising. The iron of the Qing has finally broken. The machine has stopped its grinding gears. The night of the executioner is over, and a new light is beginning to touch the yellow earth. Imagine a man named Liu Bang. He is not a prince, He is not a scholar. He is a peasant king, a man of the soil who stepped onto the throne not with the terrifying majesty of a god, but with the weary, pragmatic wisdom of a survivor. The Han Dynasty was the deep, long exhaling of a nation that had held its breath for too long. If the Qing was a clenched and trembling fist, the Han was an open hand, reaching out, touching the limits of the sky. You see the transition from iron to silk. The harsh, brittle edges of the law were now tempered by the soft, enduring grace of the sages. The scholars, once hunted and buried in the cold earth, were now invited back to the candlelit halls of power. They brought with them a secret, that an empire is not merely a collection of provinces, it is a family under heaven. A ruler must not only be feared, he must possess the virtue that keeps the stars in their courses. Now, let us look toward the west. Under the reign of Emperor Wu the Martial, the Middle Kingdom felt a new and cosmic curiosity. The emperor's eyes were not on the palace gardens, they were on the horizon. He dreamed of the heavenly horses of the Fergana Valley. Horses that sweated blood. Horses whose stride could carry a man to the edges of the universe. Imagine Zhang Qian, the emperor's envoy. You see him disappearing into the vast, shifting emerald and gold sands of the Gobi. For 13 long years, Zhang Qian was lost to the world. He was a prisoner. He was a wanderer. He lived in kingdoms where the sun felt different, and the languages were like the rushing of unknown rivers. When he finally returned to the gates of Chang'an, he was a ghost. His hair was white. His body was withered. But his mind was filled with the geography of a new world. He brought more than grapes and alfalfa. He brought the realization that China was not alone in the void. There were other civilizations, other cities of stone and glass, breathing the same air under the same celestial dome. The Silk Road was born. It was not a single road of stone. It was a shifting, shimmering path of human desire. You see the caravans, laden with the secret, lustrous fabric of the East. They are braving the singing sands, where the voices of demons haunt the wind. They are crossing the frozen, oxygen-thin passes of the Pamirs, where the world ends and the sky begins. In exchange for silk, the world sent back its gold, its lions, its glass, and its stories. The Middle Kingdom had found its breath. It was no longer a fortress. It was the vibrant heart of a world that stretched from the Pacific to the distant, hazy borders of Rome. This was the age of the Great Synthesis. The Han state took the cold administrative skeleton of the Qing, and clothed it in the moral flesh of the sages. Confucianism became the official soul of the state. To be an official was no longer just to be an executioner of decrees, it was to be a student of virtue. In the great capital of Chang'an, the world came to pay homage. It was a city of gardens where the lotus bloomed in perfect symmetry. It was a city of libraries where the smoke of sandalwood mixed with the scent of old ink. The Han scholars did not just record the passing of days, they sought to map the rhythm of the universe. They saw the emperor as the son of heaven, the bridge between the stars and the soil. But even the longest summer must eventually feel the chill of autumn. The very wealth that the Silk Road brought began to rot the foundations of the court. The eunuchs whispered in the velvet shadows of the inner palace. The great landed families hoarded the earth, leaving the peasants with nothing but the dust of their ancestors. The mandate began to flicker, like a candle in a rising wind. The empire had grown too vast, its limbs too heavy for its heart to pump the blood of authority. As the last Han emperors faded into the insignificance of ceremony, the yellow earth began to stir once more. Not with the sound of commerce, but with the footsteps of rebels and the clatter of warlords. The long afternoon was ending. The sunset of the Han had arrived. The river carries us further now, away from the golden expansion of the Han. The unity is breaking, and in the cracks of the falling empire, we shall see the birth of a new spiritual longing. The dream of a unified heaven has shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. The empire of the Han, once as solid as the mountains, has dissolved into a landscape of broken walls, wandering ghosts, and legendary heroes. This was the era of the Three Kingdoms. A time of such profound violence and poetic sorrow that the very earth seemed to weep for its children. In your mind, picture the figure of Cao Cao. A man of iron will and a restless, brilliant intellect. You see him standing on a cliff overlooking the gray, churning waters of the Yangtze. Behind him, his massive fleet is burning. But he does not look at the fire. He looks at the moon. He is composing verses, capturing the fleeting nature of life. Our existence, he whispers, is like the morning dew. This was the Wei Jin style. A desperate, beautiful elegance born from the realization that tomorrow might never come. When the sword is at your throat, the only thing left is the poem. As the wars dragged on for generations, as the blood of the youth watered the exhausted fields of the Central Plain, the soul of the people began to withdraw. Away from the world of men. Away from the noise of the court. You see the scholars fleeing. They are seeking the silence of the mountains. They are the 7 sages of the bamboo grove. Pause. They have turned their backs on the silk robes of office. They sit in the shade of the bamboo, drinking wine, playing the zither, talking about the void. To them, the world was a house on fire. If the world cannot be fixed, then the soul must be set free. They sought the pure conversation. Philosophical debates about non-being, fueled by the wild freedom of the hermit. They were the poets of the ruins, finding beauty in the transience of all things, like the falling of a plum blossom in a winter storm. But the heart of a suffering nation needs more than the wine of poets. It needs a promise of salvation. From the west, following the same dust-blown paths of the Silk Road that once carried only silk and jade, came a foreign god. He did not come with an army. He did not come with the iron laws of a conqueror. He came with a lotus flower. This was the Buddha. To a people weary of 3 centuries of endless war, to peasants whose homes had been burned, to scholars whose dreams had been crushed, the teachings of the Buddha were like a cool rain on a parched and dying earth. It spoke of the cessation of suffering. It spoke of the illusion of the self. It offered a peace that did not depend on the mandate of a king, but on the purity of one's own heart. Imagine the first monks. You see their saffron robes, a startling splash of color against the yellow dust of Luoyang. They carry their wooden bowls through the ruins of palaces, asking for nothing but silence. In the dark caves of Longmen and Yungang, they began to carve their faith into the living rock. They turned the mountains themselves into a testament of the spirit. These colossal Buddhas were not meant to intimidate. They were meant to reassure. To look down upon the chaos of the world with an eternal, unshakable serenity. The Chinese soul was being fundamentally transformed. It was no longer just a soul of duty and order. It was now a soul of compassion and mystery. The foreign faith was not merely accepted, it was embraced and reshaped until the lotus took deep root in the yellow mud. Even in this fragmentation, a new kind of unity was being forged in the dark. The northern tribes, the barbarians from beyond the wall, they rode into the heart of China. They took the thrones, but the land took them. They learned the script of the sages. They built temples to the Buddha. The blood was mixing. The philosophies were merging. In the long, cold night of the 6 dynasties, the seeds of a greater, more brilliant civilization were being sown in the dark. The river has been narrowed by the rocks of division. Its waters are turbulent. Its waters are dark. But the current is gaining strength. The river carries us further. The mists of the fragmentation are finally beginning to lift. The cold moonlight of the sages is being replaced by the first blinding rays of a new cosmopolitan dawn. The world is coming to Chang'an once more. The river of time has now flowed into a vast and sunlit sea. After the centuries of fragmentation, after the long, misty twilight of the northern and southern dynasties, the Middle Kingdom rose once more. But this time, it rose with a radiance that would blind the eyes of the world. This was the Tang. It was not merely a dynasty. It was a cosmopolitan peak. A moment when all roads, from the snows of Japan to the markets of Baghdad, led to the gates of Chang'an. Imagine the city of Chang'an, the city of perpetual peace. It was the largest forest of souls the world had ever seen. 2 million people, living within walls of pounded earth. To walk its streets was to walk through the geography of the entire world. In the West Market, the air is heavy. It smells of ambergris and frankincense and myrrh. You see Persian merchants trading in cobalt blue glass. You see Turkic horse traders bartering for silk. You see monks from India whispering the sutras of the Buddha. The Tang was a civilization of the horse and the poem, of the sword and the wine cup. The rebirth began with the Sui, who carved the Grand Canal into the earth. A liquid artery, binding the northern heart to the southern wealth. But it was the House of Li, under the iron-willed Li Shimin, Emperor Taizong, that gave the empire its soul. Taizong did not rule by fear alone. He ruled by a magnificent openness. He was the heavenly Khan to the nomads, and the son of heaven to the scholars. He understood a secret that many have forgotten. That a great civilization does not exclude the foreign, it devours it. It refines it, makes it its own. In this golden age, the spirit of the people achieved a sublime confidence. This was the era of the poets, the immortals of the brush. Imagine Li Bai, the banished immortal. You see him raising his cup to the moon in a garden of peonies. His verses capture the wild, drunken freedom of a soul that refuses to be bound by the earth. He drinks to the stars, and the stars drink with him. And beside him, the somber and noble Du Fu, whose brush recorded the tears of the common man. The heavy cost of imperial glory. To the Tang mind, a poem was not mere decoration. It was a heartbeat. A bridge between the fleeting moment and the eternal void. The Tang was also a time of spiritual odyssey. Imagine the monk Xuanzang. You see him stealing away in the dead of night against the emperor's orders. He is crossing the river of sand. He is climbing the mountains of ice. He is seeking the original wisdom of the Buddha in the heart of India. 17 years he was gone. When he finally returned, the emperor himself came to the gates to welcome him. The great wild goose pagoda was built to house the scrolls he carried on his back. A monument to the idea that the search for truth is the highest ambition of man. But even in this zenith, the seeds of tragedy were being sown in the garden of luxury. The reign of Xuanzong, the illustrious August. It began in brilliance, but it ended in smoke. The emperor fell under the spell of Yang Guifei, the most beautiful woman in the empire. The court surrendered to the lethargy of music and dance. They forgot the frontier. They forgot the dikes. When in Lushan, the general from the north turned his armies toward the capital, the golden dream shattered. You see the emperor fleeing into the mountains. You see the beauty strangled at a lonely postal station. You see the streets of Chang'an running with the blood of its cosmopolitan citizens. Though the Tang would endure for another century, the supreme confidence was gone. The empire grew inward. The Silk Road became a path of ghosts. The river began to slow as it entered the silt of decline. The river carries us further now, away from the flamboyant sun of the Tang. The age of the warrior is fading, and the age of the philosopher-bureaucrat is about to begin. The storm of the Tang's collapse has passed. From the embers of chaos, a new kind of civilization has emerged. This was the song. If the Tang was a warrior on a galloping horse, the song was a scholar in a quiet garden, contemplating the delicate glaze of a porcelain bowl. It was an age of refinement, of intellect, and of a technological prowess that the world would not see again for centuries. The founding of the song was an act of historical irony. Zhao Guangyin, a general who was clothed in the yellow robe by his own soldiers. He decided that the sword was the greatest threat to the soul. In a famous banquet, he dissolved military power over wine. He convinced his generals to go home, to buy estates, to leave the ruling to the mind. Thus, the song became a civilian empire, ruled not by the aristocracy of blood, but by an aristocracy of the mind. The scholar bureaucrats, men who earned their place through the grueling examinations of the classics. This was the first modern society. In the capital of Kaifeng, the night market lights never went out. For the first time in history, the rigid walls of the city's wards were torn down. Commerce flowed through the streets like water. The song gave the world paper money. The Jiaozi, a testament to a level of trust and complexity that was far ahead of its time. Imagine the docks, ships laden with silk and tea, preparing to sail as far as the coast of Africa. Guided by a new and mysterious tool, the mariner's compass. In the quiet workshops of the song, the future was being printed. The invention of movable type transformed the book. It was no longer a luxury of the few. It became a tool of the many. Knowledge exploded. This was the era of the Neo-Confucians, led by Zhu Xi. They sought to combine the moral rigor of Confucius with the cosmic depth of the Buddha. They looked at the world and saw a principle in all things. From the movement of the stars to the veins in a leaf, everything was connected. But this intellectual zenith was lived in the shadow of a terrifying threat. To the north, the nomadic powers were no longer disorganized tribes. They were sophisticated empires. The Liao, the Jin. They hungered for the wealth of the South. The song, having chosen the brush over the sword, found themselves in a desperate struggle. They bought peace with mountains of silk and silver. But the hunger of the North was insatiable. In the year 1127, the unthinkable happened. The Jin armies captured Kaifeng. They carried away the emperor and his entire court into the frozen north. It was a trauma that would haunt the Chinese soul forever. Yet, the civilization did not die. It retreated. Across the Yangtze, in the lush and misty south, the Southern Song established their capital at Hangzhou, the city of heaven. Here, the refinement reached an almost painful intensity. Imagine the poets and painters of Hangzhou, looking at the distant mountains through the mist. Their art reflected a sense of loss, a fragile beauty. They were living on the edge of a precipice. And yet, they continued to innovate. They invented gunpowder, not just for fireworks, but for the first primitive cannons. They perfected the art of shipbuilding. They created a world of exquisite grace, while the Mongol storm was gathering on the horizon. The song reminds us that civilization is not measured by the reach of its borders. It is measured by the depth of its thought. It was a brilliant, fragile renaissance. A moment when the human mind achieved a peak of creativity, even as the iron hooves of the steppes prepared to trample the garden. The river carries us further now. The refined melodies of the song are being drowned out by the thunder of 1,000 galloping horses. A power is coming from the high steppes that will rewrite the maps of the world. The river of time, which had flowed with such refined elegance through the gardens of the song, has suddenly met a tidal wave. A storm from the high steppes. A force of nature that cared nothing for the delicate glaze of porcelain or the subtle arguments of the Neo-Confucian sages. Imagine the north, beyond the Great Wall, where the grass meets the sky in an endless rolling ocean of green. For centuries, the nomads had lived in the shadow of the Middle Kingdom, but now the shadow was moving. This was the Mongol storm. You see the figure of Temujin, Genghis Khan, a man whose will was as hard as the iron of his stirrups. He did not build cities. He destroyed them to create pastures. He turned the world into a highway for his archers. Under his successors, and finally under the visionary Kublai, the Middle Kingdom was absorbed into the largest land empire the world has ever known. To the early 20th century historians, this was the Pax Mongolica, a violent, terrifying peace. Imagine the court of Kublai Khan. In his summer capital of Xanadu, you are walking through halls of marble and gold. The air is thick with the scent of roasted meat and mare's milk. You see the fusion of the world. Persian astronomers measuring the stars with Chinese instruments. European merchants, like the legendary Marco Polo, kneeling before the Great Khan. China was no longer an isolated garden. It was the jewel in a global crown. A crown that stretched from the Pacific to the gates of Europe. But listen closely. Beneath the glory of the Khan, there is a silence. The silence of the Chinese scholar. The Mandarin has been cast aside. The examination halls are empty. The river of Han culture has been diverted, its waters muddied by the dust of the steppes. To the people of the soil, The Mongol rule was a garment that never quite fit the body, was too heavy, was too foreign. They waited. They watched the stars. They remembered the mandate. In the mid-14th century, the storm finally began to exhaust itself. The river was rising once more. From the lowest ranks of the peasantry, from the shadow of a Buddhist monastery, rose a man of fierce ambition. Zhu Yuanzhang. You see him in the red robes of rebellion. He is a man who had lost everything to famine and plague. He had no ancestors to honor, so he decided to become an ancestor himself. He drove the Mongols back beyond the wall, back into the mists of the north. He established the Ming, the brilliant dynasty. This was more than a change of rulers. It was a restoration of the soul. The Ming sought to purge the foreign. They sought to return to the purity of the Tang and the Song. They rebuilt the Great Wall, not just as a line of stone, but as a boundary of the mind. They wanted to lock the world out and keep the tradition in. You see the rebirth of the scholar, the return of the ritual. The river was flowing back into its ancient banks. But the Ming was not only a look backward. In its youth, it possessed a colossal outward-reaching ambition. Imagine the shipyards of Nanjing, the sound of 1,000 hammers, the scent of cedar and tung oil. You see the treasure ships of Zhenghe, wooden giants, ships so large they would make the caravels of Columbus look like toys. Zhenghe, the admiral, a man of the frontier, a man who had been a prisoner, now commanding the largest armada the world had ever seen. 7 times, he sailed into the western oceans. You see the fleet moving past the jungles of Malacca, crossing the Indian Ocean, reaching the red sands of Arabia and the ivory coasts of Africa. They did not sail for conquest. They did not sail for gold. They sailed for prestige. They were a declaration to the world. The Middle Kingdom has returned. The center is fixed once more. The Son of Heaven is the master of the winds. Imagine the scene at the Ming court when the admiral returned, bringing giraffes from Africa, bringing kings from distant islands to pay homage. It was a moment of supreme confidence. But the sea, like the steppes, brought challenges that the Ming mind found difficult to categorize. The scholars looked at the ocean, and they saw a void. They looked at the treasure ships, and they saw a waste of silver. They believed that everything China needed was already within the wall. After the death of the Yongle Emperor, the great fleet was ordered to rot. The charts were burned. The shipyards fell silent. The river stopped its journey to the sea. The Ming turned inward. You see the Forbidden City. A world of 9,900 rooms. A universe of stone and silk. The Ming became a civilization of the interior. They perfected the art of living. The furniture was elegant, joined without a single nail. The gardens were masterpieces of philosophy, where every rock and every tree was a poem. The bureaucracy was a marvel of complexity, a web of silk that bound the empire in a state of stasis. For 200 years, the Ming enjoyed a long, refined autumn. They produced the finest porcelain the world has ever touched. Blue and white, delicate as a dream. But the river was becoming a lake. So beautiful, yet beginning to stagnate. Outside the wall, the world was moving. In the north, the Manchu tribes were uniting in the forests. In the west, foreign ships with iron cannons were beginning to appear on the horizon. But the Ming did not look. They continued to write their commentaries. They continued to perform their rituals. They believed that the brilliance would last forever. The night is coming. The wind is shifting. Can you hear it? The sound of hooves crossing the frozen rivers of the north. The last imperial sunset is about to begin. We have reached the final gate. The river of time, which has carried us through the mists of the Yellow Emperor and the golden bells of the Zhou, has now entered its widest and most treacherous delta. The water is deep. The current is slow. And the air is heavy with the scent of a long imperial autumn. Imagine the year 1644. The Great Wall, that dragon of stone we saw the first emperor build with blood and bone, has been opened once more. Not by the force of a battering ram, but by a crack in the spirit of the Ming. From the dark, frozen forests of the north, from the land of the Manchus, a new power is descending. You see the Qing, the pure dynasty. They do not come with the silk robes of the scholar. They come with the bow and the horse. They come to impose a new stern order upon the exhausted plains. To the early 20th century historians like Alexis Cross, this was the final conquest of the frontier. Imagine the decree of the Q. One half of the world's men, ordered to shave their foreheads and braid their hair, a sign of submission etched into the very body of the nation. It was a silence that lasted for generations. But beneath the stern laws, the Middle Kingdom found a new kind of peace. You see the era of the High Qing. The long golden afternoon of Kangxi, Yongjing, and Qianlong. For 150 years, the earth was still. The population exploded like a garden in spring. The borders stretched further than ever before, deep into the heart of Central Asia, into the high snows of Tibet. Imagine the Emperor Qianlong, the old man of the 10 victories. You see him in the summer palace, sitting in a pavilion of carved jade. He is a poet. He is a collector. He believes he is the master of all things under the sun. To the Qing mind, the world was a completed masterpiece. There was nothing more to learn, nothing more to seek. They looked at the porcelain vases, and they saw the perfection of the universe. But listen. Far away, beyond the wine-dark sea, the world was changing in ways the court in Peking could not even dream of. Imagine the year 1793. A ship arrives from England. Lord Macartney. He brings the gifts of a mechanized age. Clocks, globes, telescopes, the ingenious toys of the West. He seeks trade. He seeks equality. But the emperor looks down from his throne, and he sees only a barbarian seeking a master. "We possess all things," Qianlong wrote to King George. "We have no use for your manufactures." It was a moment of supreme historical blindness. The river of the Middle Kingdom had become a stagnant pool. It did not know that the ocean beyond was rising in a storm. While the Qing scholars were perfecting their calligraphy, the West was perfecting the steam engine and the iron cannon. The clock was ticking. Pause, and the mandate was beginning to tremble. The 19th century did not arrive with a poem. It arrived with the smell of opium and the roar of the nemesis. To the Victorian historians, this was the collision of two worlds. One made of silk and memory, the other made of coal and iron. You see the Opium Wars. The coastal forts, built to stop pirates, now crumbling under the fire of industrial warships. The Treaty of Nanking. The first unequal treaty. A wound in the side of the empire that would never truly heal. The peace was broken. The glass dome had shattered. But the greatest threat was not from the sea. It was from within. Imagine the Taiping Rebellion. A civil war so vast, it claimed 20 million lives. A storm of fire and blood that shook the very foundations of the earth. The river was now a torrent of resentment. The peasants, who had been the backbone of the empire since the days of the Zhou, were now the instruments of its destruction. In the center of this storm, you see a woman, Cixi, the Empress Dowager. She is the ghost of the old order. She is trying to hold back the tide of the future with the silk fans of the past. She sits behind the yellow curtain, making decisions that will determine the fate of millions. She spends the empire's silver on a marble boat that cannot sail, while the foreign powers carve China into spheres of influence like a ripening fruit. The twilight had become a long, agonizing night. The Boxer Rebellion. The Eight-Nation Alliance. The flight to Xi'an. The empire was no longer the master of its own house. You see the last emperors, children caught in the machinery of history. Guangxu, the prisoner in the summer palace. And finally, Hui, a young boy lifted onto the throne in 1908, unaware that he was the final note in a 5,000-year song. In 1912, the silence of the Forbidden City became permanent. The imperial sun set one last time over the tiled roofs of Peking. The mandate of heaven, which began with the Yellow Emperor, had finally departed. We have traveled a long way together. From the yellow silt of the Huanghe to the iron gates of the modern age. We have seen order emerge from chaos, and chaos return to swallow order. We have seen the rise of the sages and the fall of the emperors. The Middle Kingdom was never just a place on a map. It was a dream of harmony, a dance of ritual, a struggle for the soul. The dynasties are gone. The palaces are museums. The silk is in the glass cases. But the river remains. As you drift into the deepest layers of sleep, remember that history is not a line. It is a cycle. Like the breath you are taking right now. In and out. Rise and fall. The Middle Kingdom is sleeping now, waiting for the next dawn. But for you, the journey is finished. The silence is complete. Good night, traveler. Sleep well. The river flows forever.